And it's Thursday, the 29th of January, the year of our Lord 2026. It is 10 o'clock a.m. in Washington. It is 5 o'clock p.m. in Kiev, where it is getting dark. It is now cold enough in Kiev that some of the sewers are freezing, and sewage is now backing up into people's houses, which is disgusting. And it is about to get super cold here. It has been a cold winter already. It is now forecast to get down to negative 25 degrees Celsius after a brief warm up to around freezing for the last few days. And this is, it's turned into a real crisis. And it is a crisis that we are uh, at best as I can tell, the Western press, with the honorable exception of the New York Times, is paying virtually no attention to. And But it is really causing a lot of misery here, and it is entirely human inflicted, deliberately human inflicted, and inflicted for purposes of affecting negotiations that are ongoing. We are also going to ignore it today because we have domestic crises of our own to talk about. But I do want to not ignore it entirely, and I want to say thank you to everybody who continues to donate to the Battery fundraiser, which we have now we have spent almost all of, or had spent almost all of, as of 2 days ago, and then a whole lot more money just came in, and so we are going to spend that and try to distribute as much stuff as we can as quickly as we can. Um, eh, but if you are inclined to spend money on people's warmth and electricity in Kiev, we will spend your money. And You know how to get it to us. Um, uh, the Venmo and PayPal QR codes are on uh, my and Nastia's dog shirt daily posts, and Nastia's yours Ukrainian posts. And We are trying to figure out what the most effective way to spend money is, and we're trying to do it as quickly as we can. Um, uh, Look, the sun is not shining here. It actually hasn't. I haven't seen the sun since I've been here. It's been foggy and cold. But the birds are chirping, and this evening I heard I get to say this so rarely, a veritable murder of crows showed up and was squawking really aggressively, and I kept wondering what they were talking about. They were really excited. And It's going to be a great fucking evening because a group of young Ukrainians is holding a party for me, though I am not young and not Ukrainian. So we are going to cut this episode short 15 minutes early so that Nastia and I can procure some libations and food for the group of young Ukrainians. And uh, and you're watching Dogshirt TV, and it is a fucking revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features is that sometimes we do it in the evening. Uh, and another one of the revolutionary features, and there are many of them, is that sometimes we don't do it at its regularly scheduled time because we have a meeting with really interesting pair of think tank scholars who focus on U.S. Ukrainian relations from the Ukrainian side. And we had a kind of a summit meeting where we tried to, talked through a bunch of questions related to the negotiations. And I learned a great deal. And it is the latest meeting that I had in which I learned a great deal, all of which is a 4 minute long winded way of saying that we are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to do what we can to keep people warm in Kiev, and to uh, uh, ask you guys to continue uh, sending cash to make that possible, and also to have a string of spectacularly interesting meetings with inspiring and interesting people around and about a city that I've now been in for, I guess, 4 days, and have, despite my nationality, been made to feel very welcome. Um, all of which is not what we are talking about today. We are talking about two things. One is the latest set of dismissals at the FBI, and the second, which may or may not be related, is the search warrant executed at the Fulton County Board of Elections Administration yesterday, attended by no personage less than the DNI herself, which, by the way, undoubtedly brought down the average IQ level of the attendees at the search warrant, but also raises important questions. I can't think of anybody I would rather hear from on either subject than Mike Feinberg, who is sporting a Saul Bellow-inspired chyron today. And for those of you who do not know the phrase, I am an American Chicago-born, go procure yourself a copy of Augie March, the great Saul Bellow novel, and begin reading it now, because in the history of American Jewish fiction, it may be the greatest work. I'm not sure if it is the greatest work, but there's an argument for that Call It Sleep is a better novel, a more important novel, but it is one of the great American Jewish novels. Mike Feinberg,
Yeah,
what is your favorite Jewish American novel?
um, probably Humboldt's Gift. Um, I think Humboldt's Gift is actually Bellow's best work, but it's weirdly not my favorite. The first I read was Ravelstein, and it's for various reasons. That's when I was getting into conservative politics. Alan Bloom was somebody who was on my radar from the closing of The American Mind, and it just stuck with me in a way it's never left. And I quickly went on a tear of reading all Saul Bellow novels, and Humboldt's Gift, I think, is the best. But in terms of Jewish American fiction, I think Andrew Steele got it. I think it is easily American pastoral. Um, and I have a fun.
Just, I just
Sorry,
want to say, right last name, wrong first name. Uh, the
you
greatest
see
American
Henry
Jewish
Roth.
novel is Henry Roth,
Yeah.
and it is Call It Sleep.
So
And
I do have a funny story that everyone will appreciate, but you especially, Ben, about how I came to Philip Roth. I once dated somebody who was very into literature, considerably younger than me, who worked at a think tank with which you used to be affiliated with. And she expressed horror, like shock and horror, that I had never read Philip Roth. And given the way things ended, I refused to read Philip Roth for nearly a decade after, until my best friend, whom you've also met, um, told me I was fucking insane and that at the very least I should go read The Ghost Writer. Um, and I was so blown over that in the course of less than 6 months, I read literally every novel he ever wrote, which is not a
there are a
small,
lot of them.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it was at the same time that the Library of America was putting out his complete works. So I just got the set, and for 6 months, that's what I did.
Well, I will tell you, before we turn to local, I will tell you, I will merge our two conversations and tell you an interesting Philip Roth story from Kiev. The other day, I had dinner with a woman who I met over Twitter a number of years ago, and she's a literary intellectual here whom I admire very deeply and who I was keen to meet because when I was doing my crash course in modern Ukrainian society for 3 or 4 years ago now, a crash course that has never really ended, but I thought it was a crash course at the time. I found her Twitter feed extremely valuable, and we were talking about the relative absence of Ukrainian literature in Western literary circles, which is largely a function of the fact that a lot of it has never been translated. And she observed that that's because Ukrainian literature does not have a Philip Roth, and that Philip Roth is personally responsible, among other things. And I had forgotten this, that he did the Penguin Classics translations. He supervised the series that brought Milan Kundera to Western attention. He was responsible for the visibility of a lot of Eastern European writers in the West, and her observation was, and that she also mentioned Susan Sontag in this regard, and that Ukraine needs a Philip Roth figure, somebody who is a significant literary figure in the United States, to convince a publishing company of size and muscle to do a significant series and then be the general editor and supervisor of that series. And I thought that's interesting because a lot of the Eastern European writers that I am familiar with and have read are because of that series as well.
Yes.
And I had never noticed that until Bogdana mentioned it the other night.
And we actually, I mean, Philip Roth wrote a number of novels, as did Saul Bellow, actually, that take place in Eastern Europe. And both wrote a number of essays on the literary scene in that region.
All right. All of which is more time than I meant to spend on contemporary fiction, American Jewish fiction, Eastern European fiction, or Philip Roth. But if that said, Mike, let's start with the firings. What is the latest round of the Kash Patel massacre?
So I want to be a little bit circumspect here, because this has not been widely reported. So I'm not going to name names. We may talk about one by position because it's relevant to some of our other topics. But 4 executives, by which I mean ASACs, assistant special agents in charge or above, and 6 line agents in Miami who had the misfortune to be assigned to the search at Mar-a-Lago as of Friday afternoon, no longer have a livelihood.
What do we know about any reason for this? Are any of them suspected or alleged to have done anything other than been assigned to and participated in the Mar-a-Lago raid?
Well, as far as I know, none of the executives were affiliated with that case whatsoever. One had the misfortune to once, many years ago, have been Christopher Wray's chief of staff. One had the misfortune of having been in a field office when something else happened, even though he was on vacation and bore zero responsibility for it. Others, it's weird. Some of them were actually put in place by Patel and Bongino. And since it is already being talked about in the chat, I'll just say One of them was the special agent in charge of the Atlanta field office, which very recently raided the Fulton County elections archives. But it's not known whether the timing of his departure is related to that or if it's simply coincidental.
Um, and what do we know about who is responsible for the dismissals?
Well, wait, I mean, um,
I mean,
the
obviously Patel is,
yeah,
but
obviously Patel and the deputy directors are the ones who make that decision. So Patel is probably driving it at the request of the White House, at least with respect to the ones who are at Mar-a-Lago. The others, look, there's Patel as the director, then there is Andrew Bailey, who is the non-FBI indigenous co-deputy director. And then there is Chris Rea, who recently became co-deputy director and is a career special agent. And like the buck stops with them. I think it is entirely fair, even without seeing the paperwork, to know that this lies at their feet because they are the three who ultimately drive these decisions and are the ones responsible.
and what do we know about the individual agents in question? I mean, other than that, there seems to be no basis for dismissing them. Are any of them distinguished by anything in particular?
I mean, I'd like to say, and this is not me putting my Boy Scout hat on, but like they were all distinguished. They were all career civil servants who dedicated their lives to their country. And I know for a fact many of them at times risked those lives.
Right. No,
I
but
no,
I
no,
was asking
I'm saying
I was
like,
asking I was
yeah,
asking a different question. I mean, my I didn't mean are any of them particularly good agents or that wasn't,
oh, I'm
but
sorry. Okay.
my question was something else, which is,
Mhm.
you know, uh, in at the time that you left, I made a point of saying, hey, FBI special agents are forged, not born.
Right.
And, there's you were a CI guy with very specialized expertise.
Yes.
You have good Mandarin. You
Mhm.
read Proust and saw
I
Bellow.
don't know that.
Uh,
I honestly don't think Proust. No, Proust did help me in my career.
See, um, no,
Sorry.
your movie and literary tastes are actually a joke, but the
I
Mandarin
know.
is not, and the CI background is not. And so when I hear that, that FBI agents have been dismissed, one of my first questions is,
Yeah.
you know, are they people who what is the specialized expertise that we lose in exchange for the vindictive pleasure of on the president's part?
Um. So I can't speak to the individual agents in Miami. I don't know who they are. I suspect many of them worked for a friend of mine who supervised this squad that would have been drafted to help with the mishandling of classified information's case. Um, but with respect to the SACs, it's important to know the FBI changes when you promote to a certain level. As a special agent, it really behooves you to specialize. And that's a controversial theory. There are those who will disagree with me, but I think if you're going to work white collar, the more you know about how high finance and accounting works, the better you're going to do. If you are counterterrorism, the more you know on the international scene, the more you know about various extremist strains of Sunni Islam and how to communicate without insulting that culture, the better you're going to do. If you're in counterintelligence, a language is going to help you. Um, when you get to the executive level, um, you're in a bit of a trick box because what is valued at that point becomes a diversity of experiences. And I was actually warned several times in my early career that if I wanted to rise, my laser like focus on Chinese counterintelligence was going to be a hindrance. And so when I became an ASAC, I purposely chose an office that was small so I would have oversight of more programs than just that. Um, so these SACs who got fired, um, to the extent their knowledge is a loss for the bureau, it's really a question of their institutional knowledge. They are people who, by that point in their career, had served multiple roles at both headquarters and more than a few field offices. They know how to get things done. They know who the better partners are in other agencies. They know what levers to pull. The loss that you're going to feel is not their specialized investigative expertise, although many of them certainly have that. The loss that you're going to feel is that they were
Supervisory experience and diversity
supervisory
of
experience,
experience
but
thereof.
also just like you learn what works and what doesn't. By the time I was 2 years or a year and a half into being an ASAC, I could look at an investigative plan or an operational plan to arrest somebody, and I could spot what was going to go wrong in about 30 seconds. And that's not an exaggeration. I had 16 years of experience, including fucking a lot of things up myself. That's how you learn. And the people with that sort of knowledge, the sort of knowledge that is at the front of their thoughts and they don't have to devote days to figuring it out, are slowly being pushed out.
All right, let's talk about Fulton County.
Mhm.
The uh, and let's put aside for a minute the oddity of the DNI showing up and start with the oddity of the search warrant itself.
Yeah,
Um, I'm perplexed by the question of what the basis of such a search warrant could be.
yeah,
Um, uh, on the one hand, uh, this does appear to have been a court authorized search, so
correct.
I you know, I don't I don't trust this administration on this subject one iota. On the other hand, I
Mhm.
do respect the federal judiciary, and there must have been a presentation to the magistrate that the magistrate found persuasive
Correct.
as to probable cause of a crime. So, what do we know about the what do we know about the factual basis for a search that I don't understand what the possible factual basis could be?
We have no idea. I'm not saying that to be sarcastic. There are two statutes having to do with federal requirements of the oversight of elections. Because most of that, as you and most of our audience knows, is constitutionally delegated to the state. But there are certain archiving requirements that the states have to follow. And those are the statutes upon which they're relying. But beyond that, we know nothing. This is really a black hole. And precisely because it's tied to a state where Trump directly tried to influence the counting of votes when it was apparent he had lost the election, this is worrisome. I just, I, we don't know enough. I can't opine intelligently on that question. If you are speaking, I cannot hear you. I think when you put the photo up, your mic did something. Ben, you're still muted. The screen says you're still muted. All right, I'm just going to extemporaneously opine on the photograph Ben posted until we regain sound. But for those of you who don't
All right,
know,
I am back.
you're back. All right.
My apologies for that. I could not unmute myself. But now I am unmuted because the Russian attempt to silence me has been thwarted. And yes, Richard Wattenbarger, that photo was Tulsi Gabbard at the search warrant. So, Mike,
Yeah.
like, there is a search warrant, and the search warrant
Yes.
does identify two statutes, both of which, as I read them, there would be a colorable suggestion that the um, statute of limitations would have run, even if you could think of some plausible theory under which they'd been violated, right?
Well, I think we could think of a theory. I just don't think we can think of a plausible one.
I did use the word plausible intentionally, right? You can
I know,
always
I
think
know.
of you can always think of a theory. You could use a murder statute if there was a plausible allegation of murder, but there's not, right?
Well, we do have there is this weird I'm trying to think how to phrase it. They have this very weird conspiracy theory, which we have published about on Lawfare, that everything that has ever been done to Trump in the history of the federal government is part of an overarching plot to stop him from ever gaining power. And if they do that as a conspiracy, they they do it based on the last act of the conspiracy. And if they claim that Jack Smith, as they do, is part of that, then they can bring in whatever they need to as long as they can show that like the events are all related. There are also other statutes like RICO, for example, that in some circumstances do toll statutes of limitations. So there's ways they can do this. Whether they can convince a jury that it's not utterly frivolous is a different story. But I think based on everything we've seen out of this DOJ thus far, they don't care about that.
Right. Although you would think that a magistrate judge might.
Yeah, but like, look, let's the I don't know, getting a search warrant is not super difficult. It's not like getting an indictment. It's not like swearing out a complaint.
Yeah, but hang on a second. If
Yeah.
I were a magistrate judge and someone came to me with a search warrant based on a set of facts that
Yeah.
was, and by the way, didn't cite the um, uh, a conspiracy statute, cited a retention of records statute,
Yeah.
and couldn't cite an act that happened more than 5 years ago.
Well,
But
wait. I don't think the affidavit has been released, and this is a retention of records statute, and if they have a, I don't want to use the word credible, but if they have an allegation that on its face is not laughable, that some of the records
we're
are
not
no longer
retained.
there or were not retained, like that's really all they need. Um, and they're
All
in an
right.
election. There's more. They're in an elections office, an elections archives facility, and we know that this administration is unnaturally fixed on allegations of election fraud, and there is the plain view doctrine. They could have used these statutes as a way to get in there and, you know, under as a pretense so that they could just do a fishing expedition once they're there. Um, it's not right. It's fucking shitty and lacks integrity. But like, this is such
But you think
bullshit.
it's
Pardon the
doable.
language. I just there's nothing I would put past Patel and Bondi.
All right. Help me understand the presence of the DNI. I have never heard of non-law enforcement personnel being taken on a search warrant execution, with the solitary exception of journalists occasionally being taken on ride-alongs with local cops.
And
Um,
yeah, with local cops, I was going to say at the
yeah,
federal
FBI
level.
doesn't do that, but
Well,
I,
FBI didn't. They do now.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So what is the possible justification for the presence of an IC non-FBI official at an FBI non-CI matter?
I genuinely haven't the slightest fucking idea. It creates so many problems for whatever it is they are going to try and do within the judicial system that I really am mystified as to what she was doing there. That can possibly be construed as legitimate. There, I could think of a whole bunch of reasons that are improper. She might be there, um, but I'm really mystified as to what the justification they would have used was, because she's now a witness to a search. Um, that means she is a potential witness to be cross-examined by defense counsel at whatever results from this. And look, being a witness is not the end of the world. Being a witness when you are privy to all of the nation's secrets and all the goings on within the White House that you have been exposed to, including discussions about who this administration is going to go after and for what purposes, creates some real risk for reputational risk, legal risk. At some point, this administration is hopefully going to end, and it is not beyond the realm of possibility that a future administration looks at the blatantly political prosecutions that are going on and decides that there was a criminal conspiracy in even planning them. And Tulsi Gabbard is not a prosecutor. She does not have the immunities they do. She's going to have to go on the record now about certain things she's seen. And if she tells the truth, I suspect that's going to get her in trouble with the White House. And if she does not tell the truth, that's going to open her up to a potential perjury charge. There is no good outcome for her from being there.
Um, what are the circumstances in which she would she would have to testify? I can think of two. One is if the Fulton County Board were to file some kind of
Exclusionary
action.
motion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
um, a la Dan Richmond, you could have evidentiary proceedings associated with that, but I also could imagine more likely, if you imagine some prosecution developing out of this, that a suppression motion in by any defendant would
Yeah.
inevitably. I mean the this is a bit of a but the possibility of a sort of gray mail-y suppression motion where you go after testimony by the DNI about
Yeah.
White House interference. I mean, that's a no-brainer for a defense lawyer,
Yes.
right?
Yes. And there's also and this is irregular enough that I don't know what sort of motion this would lead to, but there's a lot of administrative requirements within law enforcement before you do a search warrant, while you're doing a search warrant, and when you submit the search warrant returns. And one of the things that you need to be able to show is that the evidence was not tainted during the search, that everybody involved is in the chain of custody for whatever they touched. So there's going to be
and that picture that I showed earlier shows her with boxes of material.
Correct. So it's going to be an open question. Was she alone in that truck? If so, she needs to be on the chain of evidence. Was she not alone in that truck? If so, there was probably a special agent there who is going to be called to testify about what she did with that evidence. Like, this is, I guess as citizens, we should be thankful that they're this sloppy because it opens up attacks to support the rule of law. But I don't know. This is just so far beyond the pale of anything I ever saw in my own career at any search scene that I really cannot fathom.
Jim Clapper never showed up while you were executing a search warrant?
I interacted with the DNI, the actual director, exactly once. It was Dan Coates. And we were doing something that was going to
photobomb a search warrant, though?
No. I will explain this. I will explain the circumstances with which I was with him. We were doing something that was going to have severe ramifications for international relations and for the intelligence community writ large. It would have been irresponsible not to give him a heads up that this was coming. But we were meticulous in the timing of when we told him because we didn't want to taint the judicial process. So I went to his office with a very senior official after we had already obtained a sealed indictment against the relevant parties and the investigative stage was done. And we literally synchronized our meeting with him to the exact minute at which the complaint was unsealed. Like, you don't do this stuff casually. There are parameters set by policy, set by law, set by just general notions about the propriety of people who are not involved in investigations being read into them. In other words, the norms that we call the rule of law that would have prevented something like this. And it's really effed up that they did this.
All right, we got 6 minutes left.
Yes.
Reminder to everybody that we are ending 15 minutes early today. So, um, what are the possible remedies here? I think the answer is in the immediate term, none,
Nothing.
right?
Yes. It's look, it's what the remedies are going to be depends on what exactly it depends on three things. What exactly happened? What was the justification for what happened? And what are they going to do with the fruits of the search? Until we know the answers to at least one of those questions, it's really difficult to try and prophesize what potential remedies would be.
Right. There is one important pre-remedial question, which is, of course, making sure the record is very clear.
Yes.
And for that reason, I would not be at all surprised to see the Fulton County people go into court and just try to pin down
Yeah.
everything they can pin down. But don't expect that. And again, for those of you who take my uh, when I express skepticism about a legal case, who take my skeptic don't take my skepticism as a as saying they shouldn't do it. But I think they will likely go into court. It will likely go nowhere, but it is an effort generally to force the feds to have something to say about what they did. Um, Fred, the floor is yours.
Hey, thanks. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Hey, Mike, I just wanted to ask you quickly your thoughts on the so-called military purge in China, what that might mean for China internally, and also the Taiwan situation.
Yeah. So, the Taiwan situation is incredibly worrisome. We, you could take issue with the strategy of strategic ambiguity we've maintained since the Taiwan Relations Act was passed. But we sort of blew it up when Trump told Xi Jinping essentially, it's your backyard and your problem. That removes a lot of the ambiguity about what the United States may do for at least the next 3 years. I don't think that is advantageous to our interests. There are a lot of reasons we do not want China to dominate the straits in the South Taiwan Sea. And sorry, the Taiwan Straits and the South China Sea, mostly having to do with commerce, because that is where a ridiculous percentage of the world's shipping takes place, and also because we're very reliant on a certain type of technology that a Taiwanese company really has a monopoly on. It's like, I'm not going to get too into that just because I don't want to slip and talk about things I shouldn't.
But I can talk about it. The company is Taiwan Semiconductors.
Yeah, no, that's not
And
the issue. But I mean, in terms of saying how we should deal with that, like, I'm not going to get into things that I was once. Yeah, you guys get it. The other question you raised with the purge, this is, I don't want to be blasé about it. This is not uncommon. There have been a series of purges since Xi Jinping took over, always under the pretext of rooting out corruption, and also always often involving the various ranks of the People's Liberation Army, the People's Liberation Army Navy, and the various organs of state intelligence. To the point where we've actually seen, and I don't know how much of this is public, so I'm just going to speak in generalities, like, we've actually seen changes at various points in which of those departments and agencies are really preeminent and given responsibility for certain missions. So this is not uncommon. It is almost undoubtedly not about actual corruption. and is simply more about removing any obstacles to individuals who may be able to constrain either Xi Jinping's longevity as the ruler of China and or Xi Jinping's desires to carry out certain policies both domestically and internationally.
All right, we got to wrap.
Thanks, Mike.
Folks.
Yep.
I am not sure if we are going to be back tomorrow or not because I have a bunch of other things on my schedule and some of them conflict with this. So I know that we will not be at the normal time, and we may not happen at all. We will be back on Monday. You are all great Americans, and Mike, I will see you shortly.
Tomorrow,
Talk to you later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good one.